We are now going to move on to the next presentation, which is Jenny Rolfe on exploring the effects of wheelchair prescription for holistic living in people living with MND.
Hello, my name is Jenny Rolfe. I'm an occupational therapist based in the Oxford MND Care Centre in the UK, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my case study to you today. So this case study, I'm going to give you an overview of the current situation. My presentation is concentrating on the wheelchair provision for this client and the issues that he's been having with his current provision, and what we are aiming to do with a different type of wheelchair that isn't normally standard provided by the NHS in England. So we're going to look at his needs and how we're going to meet them, and then what equipment we provided and how we measured how successful that was. So the case study is a gentleman who has spinal onset MND. He has been diagnosed for 3 years by the time we had got involved with a different power chair. By this time he is transferring using a hoist, and he has been using a powered wheelchair provided by the NHS for approximately 18 months. The chair that was provided by them was a Salsa Mini with some tilt in space provided through Sunrise Medical, and this chair is funded through the NHS, and this is based on criteria that is set out by statutory funders. So the client presented to me in clinic and was reporting that he was uncomfortable in his wheelchair, and that he was experiencing quite a lot of pain when he was sitting in the chair for a long time. He particularly noted his legs would swell, and he had requested elevating powered leg rests on his power chair through his NHS provider, but the criteria under which the chairs are funded would not include this feature on the chair, so they were unable to provide this, even though the chair had the capacity to have that functionality. As a result, he was unable to sit in the chair for any length of time, and so he was really considering his role at work, whether he could continue to work, and also it was affecting how long he could travel for in a vehicle, because he couldn't sit in his chair for very long. So that limited his ability to go away, which he liked to do at the weekends, and also to travel to clinic, for example. So following seeing him in clinic, I completed a postural assessment, and Permobil is the company that's been partnering me in this project, and they have provided the power chair for this project. So a representative from Permobil attended the appointment with me, and we identified all of his seating needs and set out a prescription of chair to meet all his clinical as well as his social needs, which is not something that is normally looked at through NHS provision in great detail. The main emphasis is on clinical need. So the patient had aims of being comfortable, and he wanted to be able to travel in the chair for longer distances, continue to go to work, and he wanted to be able to take the power chair off-road slightly to go and walk the dog. He wasn't wanting to do major off-roading, but just to be able to go on a slightly bumpy track rather than a clean pavement to walk his dog. So to look at the provision of chair and how it differed between this chair compared to his NHS chair, we looked at what outcome measures we could use, and we used them at different time periods throughout the project. So I completed an interview with the client at the point of first assessment, when he was finding problems with his chair, and then when we provided the Permobil chair, and then at 3 months, 6 months and 9 monthly intervals. The reason we wanted to do it over a long period of time was that we wanted to see if the Permobil continued to meet all of both his clinical and social needs over time. So we compared the NHS chair to the Permobil chair and looked at the Permobil over time. The outcome measures we used were the functioning every day in a wheelchair and the wheelchair outcome measure. And as I mentioned, a structured interview, which I completed with the person with MND and also his carer. So this table just sets out what I assessed for at different points in time. So you can see the Permobil, we had a baseline, looked at the functional activities, a carer baseline, 3 months, 6 months and 9 months, whereas the NHS chair was just in the baseline, because he stopped using the NHS chair once we provided the Permobil. The differences between the chairs were the NHS chair had a 30 degree of tilt and space, whereas the Permobil has 50 degrees. It had 30 degrees of powered recline, whereas the Permobil has 180 degrees of powered recline. It was a single actuator operation, so you could only move the tilt singly and then the recline, so you couldn't do them both at the same time. It had no memory settings, and as mentioned before, didn't have the powered elevating leg rests or a riser. The Permobil could move all the tilt and recline and elevate legs in one single motion, and it has memory settings, so you could set the chair up to go into office mode or going into vehicle mode, and you can just click on that memory setting and the chair will move into that position. So when we asked the client about how he was functioning in his NHS chair, these are the outcomes. He reported that his lifestyle and functional needs were limited due to his pain and discomfort, and he could only work a short amount of time, and he needed to rise up in the chair because he couldn't reach shelving. He reported pain in his bottom and his back, and his foot fell off the foot plate and needed frequent repositioning in the chair. He was able to drive the chair and using the controls without any problems, and the chair could get around his property, no problem at all. It could get inside his wheelchair accessible vehicle. However, he found it was not great going off-road, off pavements, so it was difficult walking the dog. He wasn't able to use any additional features like charging his phone or connect it to his phone. And the carer outcomes reported that there wasn't really any issues that she had, only that the client needed to be repositioned in the chair quite frequently. So asking the same questions of the Permobil after he had the chair, this is a baseline, so after the chair had been used for a week. And he reported that he was able to complete all his functions that he wanted to do at home and at work. He could sit in the chair for a much longer period of time, which meant he could travel and go to football matches. He can lay down in the chair at work to get a rest. In terms of his posture and comfort, he said that the back pain and bottom pain was relieved and he was able to sit in all day and offload the amount of weight going through his buttocks due to the amount of tilt. He could change position in his chair, and so he didn't need to change into other alternative seating, and his edema, he reported, had improved in his legs. He had no problem with the controls. There was a slight issue with environment because this chair was slightly larger. He said it was more difficult to manoeuvre in the home, but he could do it, and it was slightly more difficult to get into his wheelchair accessible vehicle, but he was able to do this. He was able to connect his phone and charge his phone through the chair. The carer reported no problems with using the chair, and actually that she felt she needed to give her husband less support because he was transferring less into different other seating, and he needed less repositioning. So this table shows the functioning every day in a wheelchair results through the NHS chair and the permobil chair. So this is comparing the NHS to the permobil. And generally, for each item on the functioning in everyday wheelchair, he had improved in the permobil compared to the NHS chair. And then looking at how the permobil fared over a time period from week 1, 3 months, 9 months, it continued to meet his needs, and he was able to demonstrate that throughout time the chair improved his functionality. So what does that mean to us as clinicians and in practice? Certainly in the UK there is a bit of a postcode lottery. Depending on where you live in the country will depend on what criteria your wheelchairs are commissioned under. So in some areas something like the riser for the legs, for example, may have been provided, but in the area that this gentleman was living in, it wasn't. The current criteria does only take into account clinical needs and basic environmental needs, and it also limits what equipment the NHS can provide. So the chairs and the technology available through the products that they're actually using is greater than what they are accessing. So it doesn't really maximise the potential for the product use or for the client use of that product. If we were to be a bit wider in our remit and look at funding chairs to improve not only clinical needs, clinical outcomes, but also looking at those functional outcomes, we could see a greater involvement of that person in different occupations and participation in different activities and society. There is the wider implications that actually, if we can better support somebody in seating, they may well have less secondary health conditions. So for example, the edema in this client was reduced when he was able to elevate his legs and move his legs in an ergonomic way and use those memory settings on the permobil. He reported that he could exercise his legs in the chair, which improved the edema and reduced the pain he was experiencing. We've also seen a reduced burden on the carer, so it may be that the prescribing a higher functioning chair could lower the care costs, where if somebody needs less repositioning and can do more tasks themselves in the chair, and the functionality is improved, that this could reduce the amount of care somebody needs. And generally, if somebody is able to participate in society and function in work roles, there is a contribution back into the economy of society, and this in itself will help the general sort of funding scheme of things. So that brings me to the end of this presentation. I'd just like to thank my client and his wife for taking part, also the M&D Association who fund my time, and of course Permobil who provided the wheelchair and all accessories that we used, and a member of staff from the company to assist me with setting the chair up. So I'd like to say thank you again for the opportunity, and if you have any questions, there's a live question and answer session that you can post your questions to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There are a few questions. That was excellent. It's really interesting to see the difference. There is a question from Amber Ward from the US about, that this isn't necessarily specific to Permobil. I think you addressed it a little bit in your presentation, but if you could just address the differences in availability of power wheelchairs.
Yes, so in the UK, in England, the wheelchairs are prescribed under the NHS, so the person doesn't have to pay for the chair themselves, they don't have to buy it. So that's obviously a big cost saving to the person. However, everybody in the United Kingdom is entitled to a chair, so it has mobility issues, which limits how much money can be spent on individuals. And so there has to be quite a clear criteria as to who is eligible for certain products and what products are provided. Now, this differs around the country because commissioning for each area of the country is done by different groups. And so some areas will prioritise something like the elevating leg rests, whereas in other areas they don't. The point I was kind of making with the chairs are that actually the one that he was given by the NHS does have the capacity to have a lot of the features that the Permobil does. It's just that it wasn't funded to be put on. There could be the option for the client to increase the spending themselves, and certainly the M&D Association spends a lot of money through their grants to provide top-ups for the power chairs, to provide functionalities such as the risers or an attendant control, for example, that aren't standardly provided in the NHS. The main difference in different manufacturers as well in the NHS, they are limited to a few manufacturers of products as opposed to the whole range that's clearly available. And so Permobil wouldn't be one that's typically provided through the NHS. And certainly the top end of some of the other products that are used in the NHS through Invacare and Sunrise, the higher end products are not generally prescribed that can do a lot of the functionality that I explained in the Permobil. So hopefully that covers that.
Yes. Which Permobil did he get?
The M3.
So that, yes. So somebody is asking about public transportation. Is it accessible to people using power wheelchairs?
Generally, yes. So buses and things like that can lower down. The rail service is a bit more haphazard, and certainly, for example, the tubes, because when they were built and designed, they were underground with lots of steps and no lifts. So there is an environmental issue for some wheelchair stations, but the rail network does try to make it as accessible as possible. And you can get wheelchair accessible taxis, but trying to get hold of one of those is quite difficult sometimes. It's easier in place in the cities, but in more rural areas, quite often a taxi will charge you to actually come out to your property and then take you. So you're paying 2 fees.
Okay, and I think we have time for one more question. And Pablo Aquano wants to know how do you help someone who can't get a Permobil through the NHS to get one?
The NHS used to run a scheme called the voucher scheme, and there's now kind of rebranded it into something called the personal wheelchair budget. And this is where an individual can access some funding through the NHS to then take out and pay for their own chair. The difficulty with that is that the NHS buys a large number of chairs, so the cost that they're buying their chairs at that is very different to a private dealer sale. So the money that you will get out from the NHS under one of these schemes is a drop in the ocean compared to the dealer private cost of the chair. So it is very difficult. The other issue, and we really encourage people to go through the NHS as much as possible, is that they will, as their needs change, the NHS will be monitoring their changing needs and can change the product to meet those changing needs. Whereas if you buy a chair from a private company, you're responsible entirely for any other adaptations that the chair needs to meet your changing needs. So any different controls and things like that, which can be hugely expensive.
I think that sounds like a problem around the globe. So I think maybe Jenny, you, and Amber, and anyone else who's interested, maybe we can do a study on this globe, worldwide.
That would be great.
So thank you very much. We're going to move on. Of course, Jenny, if you would also reply to some of the questions that are coming into the chat box, we would appreciate that. Thank you.